Hello, my name is Ampersand, and welcome to Ampersand's Ecologies. So, when we are going to be talking about species, we're going to have to go over baselines. This is how we're making souls. This is how we are determining their genetics. So, to get this started, character creation is the baseline where I'm going to use for everything. After looking through the entirety of Dungeons & Dragons history, I have found that that over the 28 ways that you could generate a character, there are 13 separate versions of how to create. Now, the standard stats for any Dungeons & Dragons character is strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. With some separate ability scores that are not typically any and is included in the core rule, usually as something optional. Now, the historic way that you generate ability scores is you roll dice. Typically, there are two systems that you do it. There are two main systems which I am defining. There are hard systems and there are soft systems. Hard systems are systems that once you roll for a stat, it cannot be changed for that stat and you're stuck with it. On the other end, there are soft systems, which is once you roll a number using the dice, you can attribute it to any stat that you wish. For that, I'm going to have to think of a way to create a genetic framework out of that. Now, going over to hard systems, 3d6 in a row. Once for each stat, and once you have rolled them, that's what you have. There are also other ways of generating these stats, starting with rolling those statistics twice so that you have a higher outcome. In 5e terms, it is rolling your ability scores with advantage, but it's still straight. Now, in BECME, I found in one module that due to a certain peoples being not connected to civilization, their education has failed them, so they get, in essence, worse rolls for their intelligence and wisdom compared to their strength and constitution, which they get higher attributes. For that, you would roll for. This is familiar to a lot of the newer players, rolling 4d6, taking away the lowest number, and then having that higher number as your attribute. That would apply for strength and constitution. Wow. In intelligence and wisdom, you would roll your 4 dice and take away your highest. Doing that creates a lower than average intelligence wisdom score and higher than average strength and constitution scores. That is a specific variant that is only going to apply to peoples that are not part of a civilization where it averages out the stats. It seems to be connected to schooling in some way. Now, other ways in the hard system is rolling 3d6 6 times for each attribute and then picking the highest scores out of all of them. Now, I'm not going to do that, but typically you get around the ranges of 14s to 15s with that. There's also another way where you roll 3d6 for 6 attributes 12 times. And basically, each time you finish a set, that is a separate character. And that will also and once you have rolled those 12, it's basically, in essence, rolling 3d6 straight enough 12 times. Now, those are all the hard systems. As we move on to the softer systems, we have the 46 dropping the lowest, which is the most common out of Dungeons and Dragons history. You are going to roll your dice. Depending on what you rolled, you take away your lowest, and then that is attributed for everything. Very similar to the primitive version as before. Another way to do it is you roll 3d6 12 times, you pick the highest scores from there, and then you choose what arrangement you have. And then there is one occasion where it's just 3d6, but you choose which ability scores that they go to. Now, also in the soft systems are point-buy systems, which in effect is you start with a base attribute number, which basically it always is as low as it's the base lowness, and you can't go any lower than this. And you can use points to increase those stats. For instance, one of them is rolling 7d6 and then adding whole dice to the ability score. So, for instance, rolling these 7 dice, the base being 8, I'm able to add 4 to, say, wisdom, creating a base of 12. And then deciding that I want higher wisdom, I add another base of 3, so that's 7. I cannot separate points through the separate points on an individual basis. They have to be the whole numbers into each one of them. That was one of the fairly unique ones I was able to find in my research. And another for point buy is for 4th edition, where you started with 5 ability scores starting off at base 10, with 1 ability score being base 8, meaning that one number was lower than average, and you could buy points to increase that score. For instance, you could increase that 8 to a 9 using 1 point, or a 10 using 2 points. Now, to increase those 10s, you could use 1 point to go to 11, 2 points to go to 12, 3 points to go to 13, 5 points to go to 14, 7 points to go to 15, 9 points to go to 16, 12 points to go to 17, and 16 points to go to 18. Now, the amount of points that you had was standardized at 22 at 4th edition. So out of those 22 points, you could use those points to change your scores into any way you liked it, and it is high control over that. Now, in 5th and also in 5th edition, in 5th edition, both 2014 and 2024, there was also point buy. Using 27 points that you could use, with all the scores being base 8, you could buy points, with 1 point equaling 9, 2 points equaling 10, 3 points equaling 11, 12 points equaling 4, 5 points equaling 13, 7 points equaling 14, and 9 points equaling 15. Now, using those scores, you can't buy a score higher than 15 naturally, but you are able to have a bit of a more even distribution. Along with, you could buy 3 ability scores that take them up to 15 without racial modifiers, and using that, you could have 3 relatively high stats with a few relatively low stats. We also have standard array. Standard array is basically picking these preset points and attributing each one to a specific score. For 4th edition, it was 16, 14, 13, 12, 11, and 10 being the base scores. And for D&D 5th edition, 14 and 24, you had 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8. Now, after looking over all the available, ability generation methods, it's clear to me that on average, the most common ones are rolling 3d6 straight, the hard system, and rolling 4d6 and dropping the lowest on the soft system. Both of them individually have shown up 7 times in Dungeons and Dragons history for character creation rules. For the 4d6 drop lowest and drop highest for the hard system, the strange one I was talking about before, it has only appeared once in a BICME supplement. For the 3d6 that you roll 6 times for 6 characters, that's appeared once. For 3d6, 6 times for 12 characters, that is also once. And for 3d6, rolling it twice, basically creating an advantage for your ability scores, that has also happened once. Now, there's also for 3d6 times you roll 3d6 12 times and you pick the highest numbers out of them. That has appeared twice in history. And for rolling 3d6 and choosing the attributes for that has appeared once. For the point buy, that rolling dice and using the whole numbers, that's appeared once. For 4th edition, the point buy for 5 10s and 1 8, that's appeared once. And for 5th edition, using the 27 point buy system, that has appeared twice. In standard array, the 16, 14, 13 continuous has appeared once in 4th edition. And for 5th edition, the 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, 8 has appeared twice, and has appeared twice, once in 2014 and another in 2024. In total of that, there are 28 scores will be used evenly across all humanoid player characters. Now, that we've got that out of the way, we're going to go over how genetics works on a base level. So, using these colored dice as an example, we will consider these green dice as an elf. Now, as an elf, as long as they are staying within their same region and not moving anywhere, they will retain the most beneficial attributes that allows them to survive in their area. But for instance, if they are to move to a separate area, that's for instance, and if elves have to move from a forested environment to a desert environment, that will change their subspecies. But the way I'm going to do that is going over a few more homebrew rules, just ones that I can use so that they can appear naturally. So, say we have the forest elves being created and living inside the wilderness. Their forest gets burned down and they have to leave or else risk being killed. After moving to a desert area, they are going to survive and live there throughout the generations. They're not going to live well. Now, starting that, we have the first immigrant not having any influence whatsoever. It is very much the main immigrant. First generation immigrant, it's not going to change, but it is going to start something that is a little bit hidden. The second generation immigrant, after living that area for a while, they are a lot more used to it, and they are well adjusted to there. And then for the third generation immigrant, their subspecies will change officially into the new subspecies that is adapted to that environment. Using that, that's going to be the main way that I'm going to be attributing the subspecies to the primary species. This will affect dwarves, elves, halflings, anything that has a subspecies in a specific environment. That's how they will eventually change within their wilderness. Now, There are some rules that will immediately change that. For instance, interbreeding with a separate species, for instance, an elf breeding with a human, famously creates a half-elf. Using that will bypass all of this and create the new half-elf subspecies. That half-elf subspecies will then continue to live on as being influenced by the original species, until, of course, they live long enough into a new area that it changes them to the appropriate subrace. This will only happen a couple of times, but I believe that it is enough to note. Using this, you should be able to see that as I'm not going to go hard nature rules. I'm going to be focusing more on nurture, because I think that's how the Dungeons & Dragons designers have designed it. Even throughout the past, there are some main attributes that are attributed to each species, but in the end, they keep creating these subspecies specifically for new environments. So I think it's best to make it so that it's a cultural shift rather than a purely magical shift. Now, I need more of that. Ushush gamush. There we go. Now, knowing that there are also other ways that a species can change. For instance, I learned that there are dwarves called sundered dwarves. These dwarves are dwarves that have been impacted by devastation so bad that they are changed from their main species to the separate species instantaneously. Using this method, it's going to explain how some species are immediate. Using this method, it's going to explain how some species are immediately going to change. That is one of the varieties that they're going to use. Now, we also have the problem of having multiple species interbreeding with each other, creating more than one hybrid. For instance, we will go with the elf, human, and dwarven species, and say that an elf and a human interbreeding, of course, creates a half-elf. And then in another instance, a elf and a dwarf not a human and a dwarf creates a half-dwarf. Now, if these two were to intermix with one another, they would create something new called a mongrel folk, due to the fact that this is a excuse that Dungeons & Dragons has used to create that prevent any overpowered, and hopefully it also prevents eugenics. I'm not a big fan of that either, but using that, the mongrel folk are going to be the main species that are created when three or more species interbreed with each other, thereby keeping everything simplified. Now, after looking at all this, hopefully you should understand why I'm going to have to go over species first. You now know how many dice it is taken to create, and again, because of the rules previous, all those character creation rules for rolling dice for determining attributes will be distributed evenly. If there are monstrous species, for instance, orcs being a very popular example, orcs will give birth to both the player character species, which is significantly different than the monster species. But since I want both of them to be included, it's going to be an even split. And when they do happen, the monsters will have the same stats that they do at the monster stat block. Hopefully, with that has explained anything. If you have any questions, please reply in the comments. I will do my best to answer your questions. And with that, hope you have a great day. Ugh. I need a better way of drinking. By next video, I'll think of something. Ciao.